Hey everyone, happy Friday. Sure everyone is looking forward to the weekend as much as I am. So I'll introduce myself. I am Todd Wenzel. So I am a solutions architect for Megaport based out of Atlanta, Georgia. I cover quite a wide territory. So I cover the Mid-Atlantic, I cover the Northeast, and I also cover Eastern Canada. So again, welcome. Hopefully this will be a good session and you guys will learn a little bit more about Megaport. So I am hoping that you can see my diagram today. And what I want to talk about is it's a kind of a new feature that Megaport has added, but it's been around for a little bit, and I think there's not a lot of people that know some of the feature functionalities that Megaport does offer, and it's very cool. It relies on our automation, which is outstanding. But what I want to talk about today is a Move VXC feature functionality that we have. So if I look at the diagram that I presented, I've got a Megaport that a customer has turned up in the Rogers Toronto data center, and they've turned it up a 1 gig port. So they have an existing connection to AWS, which you see depicted here. And, uh, you know, 1 gig was good for a certain amount of time, but then the customer realized that, hey, they needed to upgrade their port from a 1 gig to a 10 gig. So, that's easy enough. You build a new 10 gig port within the same data center, get that cross connect completed. It is a separate interface than the 1 gig, and it does require a brand new cross connect into the data center. So now you're plugged into your 10 gig port. You still have a 1 gig port that has an AWS connection. How do I move this existing VXC virtual cross connect connection from AWS from my 1 gig to my 10 gig port? So what I want to show in the demonstration today is how easy it is to build out this configuration. And then lastly, what it takes to actually move the VXC. And I think you guys will be pretty shocked at how simple it is. A couple of key points. So moving a VXC can only be done from port to port, MCR to MCR, which is our Megaport Cloud Router, or MVE to MVE, which is our Megaport Virtual Edge. Also, you can only move that VXC in the same metro. So if you've got a port in Toronto, an AWS VXC connected to it, and you decide to spin up a port in Montreal, you would not be able to move that VXC from Toronto to Montreal. Different provisioning type process. At any rate, that's what the diagram looks like. What I'll end up wanting to do again is I'll build a 1 gig port, I'll build a 10 gig port, I'll build an AWS VXC, and I'll show you how we can move it from one port to the other. So let's go ahead and go into my Megaport portal. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to create a service. I want to create a port. And since I'm doing this in Canada today, I'll select Canada, and I can select Rogers as my data center. So Rogers does have 3 data centers within Canada, Calgary, Ottawa, Toronto. I'm using Toronto for this demonstration. And I'll check my 1 gig port speed. Call this Todd 1 gig. Next, I have the ability to choose terms, month to month, 12, 24, 36 month. Very easy. Pricing is transparent for you. I will select next and add port. So my port is sitting in the shopping cart. I want to go ahead and order that. Goes through a quick validation process and order now. So what's happening now is we are assigning a port to this 1 gig connection, and we are also in the process of building out an LOA, and that LOA should pop up here in a minute or so, and that would be the documentation that I would provide to Rogers to have Rogers complete out the cross connect from the customer DMARC into the Megaport facility. So let's see what's going on here. Obviously, at this interface right here, you do have the ability to order multiple connections to the Megaport ecosystem. We have an internet product. We have an internet exchange. You have all of the major cloud service providers or hyperscalers listed here. And then we also have the ability to connect to many Megaport customers through the marketplace. I'm just going to go ahead and click on it. Sometimes I just need to do that to refresh the screen. Obviously, I'm not seeing my LOA yet. So why don't we do this? Why don't we go ahead and create a second port, that 10 gig, while we're waiting for the first one to become live. So I'll do Rogers again, Rogers Toronto. And this time I'll choose 10 gig. I do have the ability to do a 100 gig port at this data center location as well. Call this 10 gig. And okay, I will go ahead and select next and add port and order. Very simple process. All right, so here we go. My 1 gig port, I now have the LOA. So let's just open this up. And this will show you the tie down information where Megaport sits within the Rogers Toronto data center. So again, customers would take this LOA, pass it off to the Rogers data center, and then the data center would run the cross connect from the customer's DMARC to the Megaport DMARC. Once that's been connected, the port should become live. It is a plug and play scenario. Obviously, if there are any kind of issues, customers can reach out to our support team to help troubleshoot any problems that may exist. Okay, so now I've got my port again, my 1 gig. Let's go ahead and build an AWS connection. So I can simply click on the AWS tile. I have two different AWS Direct Connect models. One is called a hosted VIF. The hosted VIF is a platform. It's a kind of a legacy platform. It supports public VIF and private VIF and has a maximum bandwidth of 5 gig. Now, most customers that I speak with today are using a transit gateway for their AWS environment, and the transit gateway is supported by the hosted connection. So hosted connection does public VIF, private VIF, and transit VIF. Also, maximum bandwidth is 10 gig. So let's go ahead and select hosted connection. I will do a filter by country. So again, Megaport is fully enabled across the globe at many AWS on-ramps. Again, you can see a list of all of the countries where we have those deployments. Our network is physically plugged directly into AWS routers. So from your port in Rogers, Toronto to AWS, wherever it may be in the world, it is routing the Megaport's private backbone to reach that AWS router. Once it hits the AWS router, AWS will then take the traffic on their backbone to wherever your workloads sit in your regions or availability zones. Actually, I do not want USA because I am in Canada. All right, so this is a list of the AWS on-ramps in Canada. So I've got Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal. And what you'll notice is these colored circles, they are diversity zones. So we have two diversity zones or two diverse connections to two diverse AWS routers in the Andrix data center. So if you are looking to deploy an HA pairing scenario in Toronto, this will give you the availability to do so. I'll go ahead and select the first one. And let's call this AWS VXC. I'll choose a rate limit of 50 meg. So I do have the ability to go 50 meg to 1 gig. Now, 1 gig in this case is the max because my port is set for 1 gig. When I turn up a 10 gig Megaport, obviously I would have more bandwidth options. And we'll add a VLAN. I'll just use VLAN 100. And once again, I have the pricing for the size connection that I'm ordering right here for me. So it makes it easy for me to determine, what bandwidth I really can use or from a pricing perspective. I'll go ahead and just select no subscription and hit next. So here I need to add my AWS account ID, select next again, and add my VXC. Once again, shopping cart, order away. One thing I did not mention earlier when I was ordering up the ports, you can see right here if there's a term associated with it, and this is your monthly rate. So it does give you a chance to do some checks and balances before you hit the final order button. All right. So we can see here too, my 10 gig port now has an LOA as well. So again, in this customer scenario, I've got my 1 gig port. AWS connectivity is rocking and rolling on the port. I want to get my cross connect completed on my 10 gig and then migrate the services over. So you see the AWS VXC is currently in a deployable state. Um, Typically, we want to wait until that shows configured. That means to me that this AWS connection will show up in the AWS portal. So Megaport is API integrated with AWS and all of the major hyperscalers. So using that account number gives us an idea of where we need to send that API call within AWS to really tie the accounts together. Let's hop on over to my AWS portal and we will check to see it has not shown up yet. It will actually show up in the connections section. It'll just be another minute. Let me go ahead and try to do some quick refreshes. I know it usually doesn't work, but hey, there it did. So now we're showing up as configured and popping back over to my AWS account. I can see this connection here, AWS VXC, Canada Central. Let's go ahead and select the connection, and this is where I would accept the AWS Direct Connect. And then the last thing that I need to do is to actually create a virtual interface. Now, this has not been through the entire provisioning process or automation process with AWS, but once it was, I would choose Transit VIF for my transit gateway. I would give it a name. I would choose my Direct Connect gateway. We'll just call this Todd. See if it'll take that. Okay, I'll choose my Direct Connect gateway that I want to assign this to. This is an internal VLAN between Megaport and AWS. It just happens to be 100, the same as what I assigned to the virtual connection. You may see that as something different and it's not really pertinent. ASN, so this is where customers would put in the ASN of their on-prem router. And then last but not least, you have the ability to add peering IPs, or you can let AWS auto assign them. And you have a BGP password, which is required with AWS. So AWS will auto assign that, or you can put whatever you would like in there. Next, jumbo frames. If you want to enable jumbo frames, you would do so here. In this standard Megaport network configuration, we do support 9100 MTU. So fill out the necessary information, create virtual interface. That would get you along the path for starting to build out your BGP peering. But today we're not talking about BGP peering, we're talking about moving VXCs. All right, so here I am. I've got my 1 gig port, my AWS connection at 50 meg. So I want to now move this to my 10 gig port. What I need to do is select move VX or move connection, and it will show me what choices I have for that metro, or again, I mentioned port to port, MCR to MCR. Since I only have one other connection in the Toronto metro built into this demonstration, that's all I'll see. But here we go. Here is my 10 gig. So I will go ahead and click that. Select all. Okay. I only have one VXC here as well. You do have the ability to move multiple VXCs at one time. Some customers, they'll move the first one just to see how smooth the transition is. And then they know that, hey, this works really well and it's very fast. So I'll go ahead and move the rest in one big swoop. So VXC 10 gig port, select both, hit next. All right, so we're not submitted yet. Notice the note. Applied modifications may take up to 2 minutes to appear. In a live environment, the layer 2 establishes almost immediately. The BGP peering takes maybe 2-3 minutes to repropagate itself from the AWS portal, since we are again shifting really lanes as to where we're terminating this service. Go ahead and select move, and once again, another pop-up, so you're safe. You get a couple chances before you really do it. So again, please confirm you wish to proceed to move from Todd 1 gig to Todd 10 gig. During the move, connections will be unavailable. It may take up to 2 minutes to complete. Go ahead and hit confirm and close. One thing I forgot to point out, there was a green check circle that said success. So that's a good thing. And here we are. The AWS connection is no longer mapped to the 1 gig. It is now mapped to the 10 gig. Super easy, super painless, no opening up trouble tickets to have, migrations happen during maintenance windows. You have the ability to control when and where you want to move your services, from port to port or MCR to MCR. So again, very, very painless process. And I hope that you enjoyed today's presentation on the Move VXC feature for Megaport. Are there any questions, guys?